Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, faced with a growing backlash over spying allegations, China's tech giant Huawei is on the offensive. Its CEO is rubbing shoulders with businesses and political leaders in Davos this week. But during his speech on Tuesday, the chairman Yang Hua also had a thinly veiled threat for governments who impose restrictions on the company. He suggested that if it continues, Huawei would go, quote, where we are welcomed, including here in Europe. He was talking to Western governments, that is, and they are increasingly concerned about the firm's alleged links to the Chinese government. And some have already taken steps to ban or restrict Huawei's network. Let's take a look at which countries those are. Australia and New Zealand have banned Huawei from building their 5G networks. Japan has blocked government purchases of Huawei equipment. And the U.S. has banned Huawei from the Defense Department and other government agencies. All right, joining me in the studio to discuss all things tech is tech journalist Jennifer Baker. You're the expert in this topic. And also joining us, Maltese MEP Roberta Metsola. She is from the European People's Party. And so with me is political commentator from the Rasmussen Group, Nina Schick. All right, let's start with this. What is happening with Huawei? You've got to bring us all the basics. Why is this such a big deal, and what is at stake here?
Well, I mean, it's a very big deal currently in the media because we've all started to recognize that Huawei exists. It's only recently got into sort of the handset market, but it's things like you're starting to see shops, people are walking around with their phones, their devices have come on tremendously. I mean, from an actual user point of view, they're producing some of the best smartphones out there. But people are mistaking that for what's really going on in terms of the equipment issue. Because it's not about your device. It's not about your smartphone that you use. It's about the equipment that's being built into phone masts to allow 5G. And Huawei have always been sort of quite a leader in this sector. But when you think about it, this is critical infrastructure. And it's not unusual for governments, you know, with regard to, say, the energy grids or with regard to road transport or rail networks, to insist on certain suppliers for these critical infrastructures. So although this has become a big geopolitical issue, I would think from the point of view of allowing which components you put in your network, the backbone of your network, it's not necessarily surprising that countries make statements about which companies they will use.
I think what's interesting there, and I think that's why the European countries were a bit on the fence for a while, because in terms of technology, Huawei is ahead of its competition. If you correct me if I'm wrong, but they are really ahead in 5G technology. And so the reaction that we see today, Germany, is considering also banning certain aspects of Huawei because of concerns. So are these security concerns valid?
Well, I would say that when multiple member states with a pretty heavy security infrastructure start to express concerns, then we need to take them into consideration. And all of us need to, whether we are users, whether we are companies wanting to invest in technology, when there is a sense of state interference, whether it's proven or not, and a number of member states, and now we've seen other countries across the world taking measures, then you cannot ignore them. And going even further, I mean, today there was that veiled threat towards the West. You have artificial intelligence and programs that are being worked on with countries and governments such as my own, the Maltese government that has signed memorandum of understanding with this company over artificial intelligence and facial recognition cameras in urban areas.
But Facebook is doing facial recognition. Doesn't that exist already?
That worries us a lot, and we would like to know, I mean, what's behind it, what's the aim, and what are those components that are being used and the data collected.
Are you for banning, just yes or no? I mean, banning altogether?
No, I'm definitely for extreme caution.
Extreme caution. All right. Nina, you really wanted to say something.
This is geopolitically a huge deal. Huawei is obviously a Chinese company, and with the big tech Chinese companies, there is no doubt that the Chinese state has its arms deep into a lot of the Chinese companies. So it's a question of corporate espionage sponsored by the Chinese government. You only need to look at what China is doing in its own country with its social credit rating to understand that this is a big, big deal. And the question is, do we want to allow the Chinese government to spy on Western consumers?
Well, this is not security. I was reading a different analysis, and there are some voices that say, "Look, why is China being singled out here? There are other governments that perhaps we could put in you've heard similar accusations, but Western countries still work with them. I mean, is there a double standard, or are we clear on where China stands here?
I think this is a clearly cultural difference rather than a technological difference, because I think that, Huawei are going to develop their AI one way or another. And in fact, they'll probably test it more on the Chinese population than they ever will on any parts of European or US or Australian populations. I mean, I've actually been to their factories in China, and I was on a press trip, not a fact-finding mission, but I can tell you, you see very little. You are shepherded from one room to another, and they do not want to give it away. Because they're talking about, from their perspective, this is corporate secrets. So, I mean, there's issues around that as well. But I think the fundamental issue is that it's very difficult for us to understand the level of infiltration of the Chinese state into a Chinese company. So that is just fundamental to the nature of China, not necessarily the nature of Huawei.
And I think the other thing, apart from the threat, the veiled threat that we saw from Davos, is that they also are trying to have a PR charm offensive. They're trying to open up, I think, their offices. But let's see if that actually works.